Hello everyone, welcome to session 5 of LTEC 651 Interactive Multimedia Production. In today's video, we're going to talk about three things. First, I want to share with you a recent news story about working memory that has been circulating in some of the cognitive science news and blog outlets. Then I want to discuss authoring tools, our reviews and rankings, and then I want to introduce an important system called Merlot. So let's get started. So first in the news, if you'll recall back several weeks ago, we talked about the different levels of analysis from at the highest level, the sociocultural level, all the way down to the biophysical level. And of course, these are levels of analysis that we can talk about when we're thinking about the role of multimedia in learning. I wanted to come back to this because there is a recent study from NYU that's very much targeting the cognitive and biophysical level. Here's the news brief from NYU with the headline, "Researchers Identify Hidden Brain Signals Behind Working Memory." And of course, we all know what working memory is, but let's take a look at some of the highlights from this study. Basically, the researchers made a specific type of brain pattern last longer and found that it improved short-term memory in rats. The study found that signals created by brain cells are longer when an animal is learning about a new place rather than exploring a familiar setting. And the researchers did this by artificially doubling the length of the signals involved in memory recall. And when they did that, the rats with those extended waves were found to be 10% to 15% better at finding a reward in a maze. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, it's a big deal because this study is the first in the field to make artificial changes to neuronal firing patterns that actually increases the ability to learn. And so I just wanted to highlight this in case anyone's interested, because it's an interesting example of the manipulations happening at the neuronal level impacting working memory at the cognitive level. And of course, we could easily imagine how this could have real-world implications 10, 20 years down the road. So let's spin back around now to our work with multimedia authoring tools, specifically your reviews and rankings. I really enjoyed your Voicethread reviews, and of course the goal was just to take a closer look at some of the authoring tools that are out there related to multimedia production. Your task was to answer three main questions. What tool are you reviewing? What's it designed to do? What are its strengths and weaknesses from a production perspective? And do you think it's actually a useful tool? Why or why not? Now, what was interesting about it is the different ways in which you each approached these questions. Individually, you each drew on various perspectives. Some of you have backgrounds in graphic design, some in game design, some instructional design. Others of you are teachers or school tech coordinators. Many of you wore those hats when thinking about your review of a multimedia authoring tool, which was excellent. Many of you also thought about the various learners that you interact with. So some of you focused, for example, on middle school students. Others were very much thinking about what are the needs of undergraduate students because you work in higher ed. Others of you, of course, work with adults in corporate settings. So you were thinking about what do adult learners need and how might that impact my review of this authoring tool. And some of you were quite specific about the criteria that you use to evaluate your tool. For example, L focused on usability, resources and tools, and interactivity, whereas Suzanne focused on the flexibility of content, whether or not there was an assessment component to the tool, whether or not it could create content applicable for multiple platforms, and ideally, was the tool actually free and open source. I just wanted to share this with you because you did such a good job and it was really interesting to take a look at how you approach this assignment. Of course, I hope you enjoyed using Voicethread. I recognize it gave some of you some technical challenges, but obviously we use this tool to get away from the text-only critical reflections so that you could combine audio and images to create multimedia objects. So what were some of the things that you found? Well, one of the main themes was this idea of all-in-ones versus one-trick ponies. So what do I mean by an all-in-one? Well, one example is Xyleme, which was reviewed by Christian. That's a company that's trying to solve multiple problems. It's trying to enable people to create content, collaborate during the creation of that content. It's actually helping them publish that content and then ultimately distribute it and track it once it's out in the wild, so to speak. Now, we can contrast Xyleme, this kind of all-in-one product suite, with SpeechBee, which was reviewed by Melissa, which we might argue is a one-trick pony in that it only focuses on one thing, which is the creation of interactive how-to videos. And so we can imagine that these two products are quite different in who they're going after and what they're trying to accomplish. That was an important theme running through your reviews. Others of you were focused on tracking and analytics. This was another big theme. For example, in Marcy's review, she focused on growth engineering, which really highlighted its ability to track users. And it had this administrative dashboard, which allowed you to really get a sense of how many students were logging in, how many messages were added to the system, how many users were added. And so you could really track down to a very granular level or a very aggregated level what's happening with the content that you're deploying. So that's a different theme, a different offering that some of these tools provide. Another interesting example was kind of the corporate focus and emphasis on mass production. And I'm coming back to Xyleme here, which was reviewed by Christian, and I just wanted to highlight this overview text. Take a look at what's underlined here. Xyleme allows you to approach learning content at the mass production level so that your development team can spend their time producing more content and analyzing the effectiveness of the learning itself. Then it says, comma, without the distraction of layout design, image and video placement, and recreating content in multiple places. Now, I thought that was kind of a shocking phrase to add. They're thinking about layout design, image and video placement, and the creation of content as a distraction. And I think from the cognitive perspective, this would really spook Mayer and colleagues who are really arguing that most multimedia content that is created is not very effective. Part of the reason for that is because there isn't enough attention paid to design, image placement, the type of images, and how the content is being created. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's really a quality versus quantity tension that is called out here that I wanted to highlight. Other folks were really focused on the usability of the interface. In other words, are these authoring tools actually tools that the reviewers thought they could use? So Avery did a really nice job of screenshotting and talking about how Gomo learning works. And Elle did a very similar review talking about the interface of the LearnEtic tools and how the menus worked and how the buttons were laid out and ultimately how that might appeal to certain users that have a design background or are familiar with other types of design tools. Interestingly, Easy Generator, which was reviewed by Leilani, actually emphasized pedagogy more so than some of the other platforms. In particular, what stood out to me was this learning objective generator. Easy Generator assumes that whoever's creating content may not actually know what a learning objective is or may not have a lot of experience with it. So they actually have this tool to help people combine the who, what, and how to actually create learning objectives, such as the one shown at the top here. And of course, if we look over here on the left, we can see these remembering, understanding, applying all the way down to creating. Those of you who have formal education training probably recognize those as the verbs of Bloom's taxonomy. And the revised Bloom's taxonomy is what I talked about in session 1 of this course and relates to the learning objectives of LTEC 651. So those were some of the big themes and takeaways. So the next step, of course, was our authoring tool Smackdown. Way to go, everyone. I really had fun watching your Flipgrid videos. You had 90 seconds to talk about how you ranked the different authoring tools that are out there. So what were the results? Well, what I did was we actually had 21 people participate, and I gave 3 points to the number 1 choices. I gave 2 points to the number 2 choices, and I gave 1 point to the number 3 choices. I totaled them all up, and now here are our top 5 authoring tools. So in 5th place was actually Simple Show, that earned 10 points. Simple Show's description or tagline states, "We create simple, engaging videos and learning experiences to bring home your message." My sense is there were a number of you in the class that appreciated the simplicity and the efficiency that Simple Show allowed. In 4th place was Easy Generator with 12 points. Easy Generator describes itself as all-in-one e-learning software that has everything any author needs to create engaging courses in the cloud. No coding, no installation, and fully responsive. Again, I think this appealed to a subset of the class because of its ease of use. Now, in 3rd place was the Game Agency with 16 points. A lot of you were very interested in gamification and game-based learning solutions. And of course, the Game Agency argues that our digital game-based solutions transform learning outcomes. That seemed to appeal to a lot of you, although several of you pointed out that this may not work for more advanced learners and or for older, more mature audiences. And so you had some questions about that tool's applicability for all types of learners. In 2nd place was Adobe Captivate with 23 points. And of course, the description of Captivate is fast-forward e-learning, ease for beginners, speed for professionals. And a lot of you argued that you had experience with the Adobe suite of products, which made Captivate appealing to you. Adobe, for some of you, is a trusted brand. And then several of you mentioned that you're interested in the forward-looking features of Adobe Captivate, such as the examples of working with 360-degree video and or to create virtual reality learning experiences. And last but not least, our 1st place authoring tool was Articulate 360 with 27 total points. As their tagline explains, Articulate 360 is everything your team needs to create e-learning. My sense is all of you recognize that as an industry standard, and you like the fact that it was a suite of products that were solving multiple problems, and that if you were going to jump in and learn something, that is something you wanted to pay attention to. All right, so let's move on. Now I want to talk to you about Merlot. Some of you have probably heard of this before, but Merlot stands for the Multimedia Educational Resource for Learning and Online Teaching. Merlot provides access to curated online learning and support materials and content creation tools led by an international community of educators, learners, and researchers. Essentially, Merlot is a repository of multimedia educational resources. So as you can see here from this screenshot, I want to focus in on the resources that are actually available. And currently, Merlot actually contains over 84,000 materials that are available for anyone. And what's interesting, here's kind of the interface for navigating and searching on those resources. But what's interesting is the ways in which you can filter those materials. So for example, you can filter those materials by discipline. You can filter those materials by the type of material. So for example, you might be interested in animations, or you might be interested in actual collections of materials that all go together. Or you might be interested in simulations. Merlot will help you find these open multimedia resources. And you can also filter by audience, as well as whether or not the resource or material supports a mobile platform. If you take a closer look at some of these, what you will see, these little previews give you the title of the resource. So in this case, DNA from the beginning. It tells you a little bit about it, as well as the fact that its type is simulation. The author of this simulation is the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, and it also talks about when it was created, when it was last modified, as well as it gives you a rating for peer review, as well as a user rating. Now, if you were to actually click on that and go into it, you would get more information about this particular product. And if you were to click on the Go to Material button, and it will actually take you to the material outside of Merlot. And so here's an example. The subtitle is an animated primer of 75 experiments that made modern genetics. And of course, you can click on and get all kinds of information about different ideas related to genetics. So really a fantastic resource that you probably wouldn't know about. And Merlot's purpose is to help surface these so educators can find them. Now, importantly, Merlot is not just focused on finding existing materials, but it also wants content authors to be able to add their own material. For example, with your Timeline.js creations, if you created one that was particularly interesting for one of your classes or for your students, and you wanted to share that with other people looking for educational resources, you could add it to the Merlot collection. So Merlot is a really important, powerful tool that's out there that I wanted you all to be aware of so that you can add your material either as an author and or as an educator or designer, leverage some of those existing materials. Okay, everyone, we're out of time for today. Have a great week, and I'll see you in Canvas.